Honourable Attorney General, continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thanks again for the opportunity to get some material. As I mentioned to you, I hadn't anticipated that I would be speaking on this, and so I was trying to ad-lib and obviously was struggling a bit, but thanks for the opportunity. I've now had a chance to refresh my memory about some of these things, which I had a look at some long time ago. Mr. Speaker, just to mention again that as far as the deed of indemnity is concerned, it is CIMA's Board of Directors and CIMA's view generally that because of some of the amendments that was done to the Public Authorities Law, they were of the view that it might raise the issue of legal exposure to them in the carrying out of their functions. And so they asked that the law be revisited, and in addition to that, the directors took the view that as a matter of belt and braces, if I might put it that way, they would prefer to have in place a deed of indemnity. There are conflicting views as to whether or not, Mr. Speaker, that was strictly necessary, because Section 44 of the Monetary Authority Law, which deals with the indemnity for directors, and we're talking about indemnity here now, not immunity. The indemnity for directors remains unaffected by the Public Authorities Law. But the Honourable Minister mentioned that it is important that, given the importance of the role of CIMA, that the directors enjoy the necessary comfort and peace of mind, if you will, in carrying out their function. And I certainly agree with her as far as that goes. Mr. Speaker, the issue of, well, what brought about some of the concerns was that the directors and some of the staff of CIMA took the view that because the tort of negligence was introduced by the Public Authorities Law as it relates to the operation of some public authorities. So whereas before you could only sue these public authorities when the directors and our officers acted in bad faith, the Public Authorities Law now says that if you can prove negligence, then of course they can be sued as well. And Mr. Speaker, you recall the Section 12 of the Health Services Authority Law, which we had to look at based on the court ruling in the Donny Thompson matter. And the question is whether you can really, constitutionally and otherwise, shut out someone who has a genuine case where somebody has been negligent, whether you could shut them out from any remedies from the court. And so the Health Service Authorities Law has been amended to address that issue. And how do you deal with that then? If you now introduce the thought of negligence, should the public authorities, directors and staff be given the necessary indemnity so that they don't have to pay out of their pockets when they are sued and if there is a judgment against them? The Board of Directors, and well, may I just say CIMA for the purpose of this discussion. But CIMA certainly raised some concerns about the provisions of the Public Authorities Law. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, they were concerned about the possibility of claims in negligence by a third party who now enjoys such right of action, and the legal cost in defending such an action, and the prospect, according to them, that if a SEMA is going to defend these actions, they might have to seek funds from government in order to fight these cases. And SEMA took the view that, well, all of that potentially could affect their independence as well, if they have to depend on government for funding and so on. But wrongly or rightly, that was their views, Mr. Speaker, and so on. The government's position is to try and find a way to work with the directors to make sure that SEMA remain a very credible regulator and so on. And of course, we live in a litigious climate, litigious society, so their concerns about at least being sued was not unfounded. But the real question, Mr. Speaker, was whether the Public Authorities Law actually exposes SEMA and its directors and employees to these kind of catastrophic claims or potential personal impact that they complain about. And, Mr. Speaker, if you look at Section 23 of the Public Authorities Law, it says, subject to subsection 2, neither a board nor any board member shall be liable in damages for anything done or omitted in the discharge of their respective function or duties unless it is shown that the act or omission was negligent or in bad faith. Now that word negligent, Mr. Speaker, is a recent introduction to that. However, Mr. Speaker, instructively, Section 23(2) of the Public Authorities Law goes on to say, notwithstanding subsection 1, which is the provision that deals with negligence and bad faith, notwithstanding that section, where the function or duty exercised by the regulatory authority is a regulatory one, the provision relating to negligence shall not apply. Okay. So what the law was trying to do there is to say, certainly in the case of SEMA, that where it can be demonstrated that what they were doing was part of their regulatory function, then the, sorry? then the, yeah. So notwithstanding the provision, the introduction of the tort of negligence, Mr. Speaker, the cause of action for negligence, where it can be demonstrated that what the public authorities was doing was carrying out a regulatory function, then that provision would be disapplied, so they couldn't be sued for negligence. So that is in respect of the board members. Now, for what it's worth, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to also look at Section 54 of the Public Authorities Law, because Section 54 also says that an employee of the public authority, I'm talking about the directors, I'm talking about the employee of SEMA, an employee of the public authority shall not be liable in damages for anything done or omitted in the discharge of that employee's function or duties unless it is shown that the act or omission was negligent or in bad faith. So we also introduced the thought of negligence as it relates to the employees of these public authorities as well. However, Mr. Speaker, instructively, again, in respect of the employees, Section 54(2) of the Public Authorities Law seeks to disapply the thought of negligence, where it can be shown that they were doing regulatory functions. So Section 54(2) says, notwithstanding subsection 1, where the function or duty exercise is a regulatory one, in bracket by the employee, then the provision relating to negligence shall not apply. So, it can be sued for negligence. Example, if, say, the monetary authority has a driver who goes somewhere, driving the monetary authority truck to pick up some money from somewhere, and was speeding and heading back to the monetary authority, and God forbid, hit down someone or collided with somebody's vehicle, the owner of that vehicle should be able to sue the employee of SEMA who was driving that vehicle and collided with them, even though they were doing that in furtherance of their duty. But that would not have been a regulatory function. So the employee could be sued in negligence in those circumstances. Same thing. The hospital driver driving the ambulance, speeding to go to somewhere to collect someone, and run the red light, and it can be shown that they're negligent, they can be sued in negligence for those kind of things. And so this is what this provision, negligence, is now introducing. And so, but where SEMA employee do an on-site inspection on a bank and found some weaknesses or something, and decide to take some regulatory action, and someone heard about that and start off a panic alarm, and people start storming the bank, and they rush the bank and clean up the money. I'm just using those kind of colloquial expression. SEMA cannot be sued. Neither the directors or the officers can be sued in negligence by the bank for the run on the bank, because SEMA would have been acting in their regulatory, doing a regulatory function. But, Mr. Speaker, what the SEMA is saying is that, listen, even though the word the regulatory one is there in section 23(2), neither where the function or duty exercise is a regulatory one, SEMA says that language is not comprehensive enough to cover the scope, the breadth of activities that they carry out as a regulator. And so they still feel that there's an element of exposure for them in terms of the tort of negligence. And, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the other functions under monetary authority law, it is true that they do perform other functions as part of their regulatory remit. So they have regulatory functions. If you look at section 6 of SEMA's law, they carry out regulatory function, they carry out monetary functions, they carry out cooperative functions, that is where they share information with other regulators across the world, and they also carry out advisory functions. They advise the government on matters that is set out in the law. So those other functions, SEMA says, are not properly covered by the language in section 54(2) and 23(2) of the Public Authorities Law. We don't feel that the language in that section, or those sections, cover us sufficiently when we are carrying out monetary functions, advisory functions, and cooperative functions, sharing information with other regulators across the world. So we need some more comfort. Mr. Speaker, we had some discussions about that. And we took the view that even though on a purposive construction, a court might take the view that the word regulatory one in sections 23(2) and 54(2) is wide enough to cover those functions. We took the view that it might very well be that the court might arrive at that view. But for completeness and for the necessary comfort for SEMA, we agree, that the belts and braces approach would be to revisit the language in those two sections and make it quite clear that it was meant to cover the other functions that are carried out by SEMA, namely monetary, advisory, and cooperative, in addition to the regulatory function. And we take the view that that would and should provide SEMA with the requisite comfort. So there's a draft bill that has been done, and there have been discussions between the SEMA, the Monetary Authority, SEMA and the Ministry of Financial Services and the Legislative Drafting Department. And I think we are at a stage where the language has been agreed. I think, yeah, the language has been agreed. So there will be an amending bill that will be coming here shortly to address those concerns. And so, but that's not the end of the matter, because there are some other public authorities that have some concerns about the language in some of the provisions in the Public Authorities Law. And I mentioned off-reg, for example. Now, the concerns of off-reg is somewhat different. Off-reg's position is that there are provisions in the Public Authorities Law which conflicts with provisions in off-reg's regulatory law. Well, that was deliberate, Mr. Speaker, because the government took the policy decision that, as Section 4, I think, of the Public Authorities Law says, if I might just crave indulgence. Section 4.1 of the Public Authorities Law says, the purpose of this law is to provide uniform regulation of the management and governance of public authorities. So the government took the view that there must be consistency and uniformity across the board as it relates to the governance of public authorities. And so this law is now the governing law, so to speak, where there's an inconsistency between the two. Then the Public Authorities Law is the law to look for, to use. And that of necessity means that some of the provisions in some of the sectorial Public Authorities Law will have to be amended to bring it in line with this law. So that is the position with off-reg, for example. The provision in off-reg law which speaks to the appointment of certain officers and directors contemplates that those would be done under that law. The Public Authorities Law is now of the view that board of directors must be appointed by cabinet, and so on. The Public Authorities Law also set the ratio of public servant and civil and private citizen, private person on the board. And of course, it also means that off-reg law would have to be amended to reflect that new ratio. And there are some other inconsistencies. But you will find that in some of the other Public Authorities Law. So that is not to be, that was not unexpected. We're taking now a look at where those conflicts are, and the various laws will be amended to bring them in line with the Public Authorities Law. So the off-regs law and the others will be amended to reflect the government's new approach to uniform governance by public authorities. And so Mr. Speaker, that is how we got here. SEMA is of the view that in the meanwhile, whilst all of this is happening, they could benefit, they would prefer to have some comfort, some belt and braces by having a deed of indemnity which would give the directors the necessary satisfaction or comfort that there are no sort of legal exposure to them by this new Public Authorities Law. So, where do we go from here? The government is of the view that once Section 23(2) is amended, that will provide the directors with the further comfort from suit against in negligence. And once Section 54(2) is amended, that will provide the staff with the necessary comfort that they are seeking, Mr. Speaker. And so the deed of indemnity is, as far as the directors are concerned, the deed of indemnity is a quick fix for them, which will allow them to carry out their function in the meanwhile until the law is amended and they have that additional legislative comfort, if I might put it that way. And so I hope I've been able to clarify how we got here, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does the mover wish to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to briefly thank both the member from Boddentown West for his contributions and an acknowledgement of his queries as proposed in his discussion, but to also thank the Attorney General for his comprehensive response in dealing with the issues raised, the concerns regarding the legal position, as well as the concerns regarding the deed itself. And so I will not attempt to summarize what was so ably said to try to explain how we got here and the position and why we've taken the position we've taken. So certainly with that explanation already provided and with my introduction as to why we feel it's very important that we have this level of comfort needed in order to ensure a functioning regulatory authority in the interim, I am asking members of this House to support this deed and indemnity as put forward in the government motion.
The question is that, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board of a deed of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Board. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Government motion number 6 is duly passed.
Government motion number 7 of 2017-18, amendment to the Development Plan 1997. Proposed rezoning Block 13E, Parcel 175, formerly Block 13E, Parcel 13 and 14, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166 and 174, to be moved by the Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure.
Honourable Minister of Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the government motion number 7, 2017-2018, pursuant to the amendment to the Development Plan 1997, which reads as follows. Proposed rezoning Block 13E, Parcel 175, formerly Block 13E, Parcels 13 and 14, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166 and 174.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to give some background.
Honourable Minister, you have to read the motion.
Sorry, my apologies. Whereas on the 15th of March 2017, whereas in March 2017, CPA 0617, item 3.1, the Central Planning Authority considered an application for the rezoning of registration section Georgetown Central Block 13E, Parcel 4 and 15, now Parcel 175, from general commercial to hotel tourism. And whereas it was resolved to add Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166 and 174 to the proposed hotel tourism rezone area, and to forward the rezone proposal for a 60-day public notification and consultation period pursuant to Section 11.2 of the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision. And whereas the proposed amendment to the development plan was duly advertised in the Cayman Compass on the 4th, 7th, and 12th April 2017 respectively, with the general public invited to view the application at the Planning Department for comment. During the comment period, no letters of objection or representation were received. And whereas on August 30th, 2017, CPA 1717, item 3.1, the Central Planning Authority again considered the proposed amendment to the development plan following the public review process, and it was resolved to forward the proposal to the Ministry of Commerce, Planning, and Infrastructure for onward transmission to the Legislative Assembly via the Cabinet. And whereas on the 23rd of February 2018, Cabinet duly authorized that the rezoning proposal for Block 13E, Parcel 14 and 15, now Parcel 175, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166, and 174, be referred on to the Legislative Assembly for consideration. Be it now therefore resolved that in accordance in Section 10(2)(b) of the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision, the Central Planning Authority hereby recommends and submits to the Legislative Assembly the following proposal for alterations to the Development Plan 1997, a summary and map of which are attached hereto. And be it further resolved that Registration Section Georgetown Central Block 13E, Parcel 175, formerly Block 13E, Parcels 14 and 15, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166, and 174, be rezoned from general commercial to hotel tourism.
Question is that be it now therefore resolved that in accordance in Section 10(2)(b) of the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision, the Central Planning Authority hereby recommends and submits to the Legislative Assembly the following proposal for alteration to the Development Plan 1997, a summary and map of which are attached hereto, and be it further resolved that Registration Section Georgetown Central Block 13E, Parcel 175, formerly Block 13E, Parcels 14 and 15, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166, and 174 be rezoned from general commercial to hotel tourism. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to add some brief background for the members, Block 13E, Parcel 175, is located on North Church Street, adjoining the public cemetery to the north. Members of this Honorable House will be aware that the site was the former location of the Treehouse Restaurant, and the members will also be aware that Block 13EH, Parcel 166, is the site of the Coral Sands Resort, and Parcel 174 is an old house currently used for a water sports operation, and Parcel 4 is vacant. Mr. Speaker, the Central Planning Authority received a request to consider an amendment to the 1997 Development Plan for a change from general commercial to hotel tourism on December 19, 2016. The procedural background of the rezone application can be summarized as follows. The original application processed to rezone Block 13E, Parcels 14 and 15, now 175, from general commercial to hotel tourism. On March 15, 2017, the Central Planning Authority considered the application and resolved to include Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166, and 174 with the proposed rezone area, and forward the proposal for the required 60-day notice and advertising period per Section 11(2) of the Development Planning Law. The notice period commenced on April 12, 2017 and concluded on June 12, 2017. during which time no letters of objection were received by the Department of Planning. Following the notice period, the authority again considered a proposed amendment on July 19, 2017, and it was resolved not to move forward as all parcels involved were already developed or had recently received planning permission for development. The applicant for the proposed amendments requested to appear before the authority to discuss the decision to not proceed with the application. The authority obliged this request and considered the matter again on August 30th, 2017. At the meeting on August 30th, 2017, the authority reversed the previous decision of July 19th, 2017, and resolved to forward the proposed amendments of the development plan to the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure for onward transmission to the Legislative Assembly for review and consideration. Mr. Speaker, in resolving to forward the proposed amendments to this Honorable House, the Central Planning Authority recognized the introduction of an additional hotel tourism zone lands in this area would benefit the island's economy by offering more opportunities to strengthen Cayman's world-renowned tourism product. Mr. Speaker, I would feel it would be remiss of me not to provide this Honorable House with information on this proposed development. This new hotel would be a catalyst in the revitalization for Georgetown. Wellness tourism is a rapidly growing travel niche that is expected to hit $680 billion in 2017. It's expanding 50% faster than the overall tourism industry. Travelers take 586 million wellness trips each year. In fact, the wellness tourism niche encompasses 15% of global travel. That's second only to cultural tourism. It is also lucrative, as wellness travelers spend 130% more than the average traveler. This hotel is introducing a whole new tourism market to the Cayman Islands and will assist in positioning Grand Cayman as a top destination for the millions of wellness travelers seeking an experience such as this, allowing owners to capitalize on a billion-dollar industry. The hotel will be branded with a well-established and internationally renowned luxury hotel hospitality brand. It will be efficiently operated by an experienced team who has successfully operated and managed major hotels in the Cayman Islands and across the world. A management team that has a proven track record of consistently and successfully increasing hotel growth and revenue. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that on the 23rd February 2018, Cabinet resolved to refer the Planning Authority's proposed amendments to the 1997 Development Plan to the Legislative Assembly for consideration. Additional information supplied in support of this amendment request is as follows: a written summary of the rezoning application, maps illustrating the location of the proposed rezone. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I ask the support of this Honorable House to approve registration section Georgetown Central, Block 13E, parcels 175, formerly parcels 14 and 15, and Block 13EH, parcels 4, 166, and 174, as presently zoned general commercial, be rezoned to hotel tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak?
I'm not sure who won that race.
I don't believe either you won. Member for Central Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only to just add one little short thing. I think it's a matter of clarity that the listening audience and viewing audience understand that when the minister speaks of Georgetown Central, it's from a mapping perspective, I'm assuming based on planning and zones, not from an electoral perspective, and rather that the zone actually falls in the electoral district of Georgetown North. Not that that matters so much as I do support this development in every capacity, Mr. Speaker. I think that the developers involved, in my view, are good, outstanding Caymanians who I believe will bring tremendous value to this country, and I wish them all the success necessary.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will also be brief. I just had a few observations about the motion, with regard to the motion, and hopefully these observations can be taken as constructive, because I also support this sort of development, especially with regard to tourism. But I did have a few questions, and maybe when the minister winds up, he can address them. I followed the synopsis that the minister gave, Mr. Speaker, on how we arrived at this point. But one thing that's I question is that when we first, or when the developers first gave notice that they were intending to apply for a rezoning of the properties, I know that there's no requirement to have the plans drafted for the proposed development and so forth, but would any indication have been given at that time of what the intent of the rezoning was? What sort of development was going there, how many stories and so on? Because I do notice that later on in their discussions with Mr. Speaker, with the planning board, they actually indicated a change to their proposed plans, and they were, I think, planning to go up in height in the number of stories. I don't know if when the notices were sent out, Mr. Speaker, if this would have been communicated at that time, but in my mind, it would be, I think, prudent then to re-advertise, go through that, at least that 2-month period again, just for transparency's sake, to ensure that any interested parties or affected parties would have had full disclosure. I know that there's no requirement in the law, Mr. Speaker, for that to be re-advertised. However, because there were, as far as I understood from what the minister provided us with, there were already developments on some of the property and plans submitted. Individuals who may have been affected by this would have already been under the impression of, this is what is going to be developed here. And with the change of heart of the developers, I think there would be some room for, some scope for confusion. So in my mind, Mr. Speaker, I wondered whether or not any consideration had been given to re-advertising. I do note that, for example, you can't apply for a work permit based on ads which are, I think it's about 3 months old or more. So, for a development of this magnitude, I would think it would be prudent to repeat that phase at the very least, because it's almost a year later. I also would like to hear whether or not, because what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is we're amending the development plan. And we're doing it sort of on a one-off basis, not really based on, a wholesale range of changes that were supported by research and so forth. And I noticed that the plan does take into consideration population trends, land availability, ecology, freshwater supplies, sewage, all those sorts of things. One strategy, Mr. Speaker, of the plan that stands out in my mind as I read through it is the fact that the strategy has to take into consideration how to minimize road traffic and congestion. And I do note, Mr. Speaker, that part of the island is obviously heavily traversed, and there's there's a high concentration of homes and businesses and so on. So I didn't know. I'm concerned that when we amend this development plan, that we're not doing it in a way that is counter to the objectives of the original plan. And I think we're way down the road now in terms of needing to do a wholesale revision of this plan. And, you know, I'm a bit nervous about approving things in this way. However, I'm not one to stand in the way of development, especially if it's good for these islands. But I just wonder if when the minister winds up, if he could address, especially developments done by Caymanians. But why I'm doing this, trying to be constructive, Mr. Speaker, is for that purpose, because I wouldn't want controversy to follow this approval later on. And we know that that is something that is par for the course when it comes to major developments. So the more we can clear up now, the more questions we can clear up now, I think the better. So just those brief observations, and hopefully the minister can address those when he winds up. And hopefully they're taken as, you know, not just criticism, but constructive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member? Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me thank the two members who offered their support and also their constructive points. Just to say to the minister from Newlands that, and let me give a little more background, the difference between general commercial and hotel tourism. Mr. Speaker, hotel tourism will allow allows residential on the first floor. So it makes the development a little bit more flexible. The general commercial, there's a maximum of 70% of residential allowed in the entire development. Hotel commercial will give more flexibility for the developer, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, as the commercial uses are also allowed in the zone at the CPA's discretion. So there will be some retail shops and stuff as well mixed in with the development. And hotel tourism also gives the developer more clarity on the allowable rooms per acre, whereas general commercial is at the CPA's discretion. Both have story limits on them. Yeah. So for the minister, to the member from Newlands, any changes that they will have, if they plan to make to the original plans, and you are right, they had already had planning approval on the project when they put in for the rezoning. But any changes that they will make going forward, they will have to apply for modification and go through that process as well. As far as the traffic congestion is concerned, again, this is, you know, in an effort to help revitalize Georgetown, I think this will add, it's a bit of a medium density project as far as hotels are concerned. It's wellness, it's geared towards, those folks tend to prefer electrical vehicles versus regular vehicles. The majority of them will stay on the property because they'll have the farm-to-table food, the treatments, and that sort of stuff that they do at the wellness resorts. And we, of course, will be taking it into consideration. We spent quite a bit of time during the last NRA board meeting, in fact, talking about all of the developments that are happening in that area, including the Pageant Beach site, and how that's going to affect the flow of traffic. And so these are some of the reasons why roads like the Godfrey Nixon extension into Georgetown are priorities of the government. So we are taking those into consideration. I thank the member for his points, and I thank the House for their support. Thank you.
Question is, be it now therefore resolved that in accordance in Section 10(2)(b) of the Development and Planning Law 2017 revision, the Central Planning Authority hereby recommends and submits to the Legislative Assembly the following proposal for alteration to the Development Plan 1997, a summary and map of which are attached hereto. And be it further resolved that registration section Georgetown Central Block 13E, parcel 175 formerly Block 13E, Parcel 14 and 15, and Block 13EH, Parcels 4, 166 and 174, be rezoned from general commercial to hotel tourism. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Government motion number 7, 2017-2018 is duly passed.
Government motion number 8 of 2017-18, issuance of a deed of indemnity to the members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board, to be moved by the Honorable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move a government motion number 8, 2017-2018, pursuant to the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision, which reads as follows. Issuance of a deed of indemnity to the members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor License Board. Whereas the government of the Cayman Islands, the government, is desirous of issuing a deed of indemnity to the members of the Liquor Licensing Board, as per the attached deeds of indemnity. And whereas the government recognizes that competent and experienced persons are increasingly reluctant to serve as directors of corporations or members of boards unless they are protected by comprehensive liability insurance or indemnification due to the increased exposure to litigation cost and risk resulting from the reasonable expectations of their roles and responsibilities. And whereas Section 8 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision provides that, as a general rule, no guarantee may be given by or on behalf of the government unless it has been authorized by a resolution of the Legislative Assembly. Be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Boards of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board for both the Sister Islands and Grand Cayman of deeds of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Board of Directors and the Liquor Licensing Board.
Question is, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board for both the Sister Islands and Grand Cayman of deeds of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board. Is the Minister wishing to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, very similar to the motion moved earlier, my ministry has found that competent and experienced persons are increasingly reluctant to serve as directors of corporations or members of the board unless they are protected by comprehensive liability insurance or indemnification due to the increased exposure to litigation costs and risks resulting from the reasonable expectations of their roles and responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure is therefore desirous of issuing a deed of indemnity to the members of the Liquor License Board. Mr. Speaker, as required by Section 8 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2017 revision, a resolution must be obtained from the Legislative Assembly to grant approval to the deed of indemnity. The deed of indemnity and the government motion, Mr. Speaker, was drafted by the Ministry in consultation with the Legal Department, which approved the document as shown in Appendix A. Mr. Speaker, the deed of indemnity has been extended to civil servants as precedent had been set by a previous indemnity which was extended to civil servants. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I ask for the support of this Honourable House to approve the issuance to members of the Board of Directors for both the Sister Islands and Grand Cayman of the Liquor Licensing Board of a deed of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My remarks will be brief, but just wanted to remind this Honourable House having sat on the business staff and plan board before, I do recognize the liability that exists for members who serve on these boards, because we had similar concerns, and I'm happy to see at least some members of some boards are being protected. But I just want to put it out there, Mr. Speaker, that there are other directors on other boards that remain exposed and have some risk, and I'll just ask the government to make sure that, to make the government just to make sure that they bring the requisite legislation so that we have other directors on other boards that are protected. Just one note on this one, Mr. Speaker. I noticed that the membership on this board includes other government civil servants, such as Mr. The member from planning, and also the representative from the DEH. Now, I believe in law, and just bear with me a little bit, I think it said either them or they designate. In this situation, would we be given the individual, or would we be given the individual coverage, or was this coverage intended also to go to whoever the designate is? So I think that's one of the things to just probably clear up. But outside of that, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that that's, yeah, so from that standpoint, I just want to put that back out there to remind us to make sure that we look to protect all directors that serve on all government boards, because, again, they're giving a good public service to the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Do you understand that? You're naming the individual. You're naming the individual, but it's his or her designate as well. And sometimes they go to the board.
Honorable Attorney General.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I think, I understand what's being said. I think the point there is that it's actually signed by the director himself, right? But I think in the usual spirit, Mr. Speaker, even if it is his designate who is accused, for want of a better word, of acting negligently or otherwise, then it is the government's responsibility, unless it can be shown that that person, the designate, was acting in bad faith. It would be the government's responsibility to absolve them from any legal exposure in those circumstances. So it would work the same way.
So the substantive post holder would name is here, but their designate at any point would be covered by the government.
Would enjoy the same benefit, because the government would
Yes.
have to, as a matter of obligation, have to observe.
I think that's what's my understanding. Honorable Minister, Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, just to say, because I know there will be some concern there, we've had very bad conduct by in particular one member, former member of the Liquor Licensing Board, Mr. Woody DaCosta, who was the acting chairman of the board, and who, among other things, appears to have fabricated minutes and it seems manufactured a meeting which did not occur to achieve a particular result. Absolutely terrible behavior, Mr. Speaker, and the board moved, the cabinet moved as it needed to move and terminated his appointment. Mr. Speaker, in those particular circumstances, this indemnity would not cover that sort of behavior. And I want to make that clear, because I don't want anyone who is appointed now or who may be appointed subsequently, or the broader public, to believe that this indemnity is in any way trying to to cover that type of egregious behavior. Mr. Speaker,
If you do that to one of your party members.
Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to get on the talk show as a host and claim to be a person of integrity and to attack the government and individual members of the government. Anyone is entitled to do that. But, Mr. Speaker, when you have and are given a role such as Deputy Chairman of the Liquor Licensing Board, and you behave in such a way, you cannot expect to continue in that role, nor can you expect the government to speak up on your behalf. The government I lead will not, Mr. Speaker, allow that kind of conduct to go on without there being serious consequences. And as I said, an indemnity like this would not cover that, because those actions were actions taken in bad faith. And, Mr. Speaker, if it has never been said before, the public needs to understand why Mr. Woody DaCosta is no longer the acting chairman or deputy chairman of the Liquor Licensing Board. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that he explains his situation, as I know he is very able to do, when he gets on the talk show on Monday morning.
A member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am reliving 2002 to 2005. You're back. You know where I'm at with that. Mr. Speaker, he asked me to say he also took him off that Port Authority board, you know. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, on a matter of elucidation, can the Premier not tell us the other boards that Mr. Wood was on?
Do you need elucidation for something that was obvious?
Or, well, I can say it. It's the Port Authority board. I had a little song for the Premier as well. I can see clearly now the ween is gone. Mr. Speaker, I don't have much problem with it, other than if we are saying that the designate of the substantive post holder of there's no 1.1. Mr. Speaker, my concern is that there are two deeds here. And I don't know which is which, because each one names separate people. One starts with Mr. Noel Williams, and the other one starts with Mr. Nathaniel Tibbetts, Sr. That's Cayman Brack, but Roydell is on both. Roydell Carter, that is. He can't be. Are we sending him to Cayman Brack for a meeting, or is his designate that would be there. So Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, somehow that needs to be cleared up and
Obviously, the minister will clear up matters when he rises. If no one else wishes to speak, I'll call on the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I just...
So, before the
Just
Honourable Attorney General.
Yeah, just a matter of clarification. The point I was making is where the person is a civil servant,
Yes.
even though he has a deed of indemnity, which I don't know whether it's necessary or not. That's another issue. But all civil servants, if you look at the Public Service Management Law, it says that civil servants are immune from liability, and further once they're carrying out their job, unless it can be shown that the act or omission was done in bad faith.
So why do you have those two?
Well, I mean, we're all talking about comfort here. People somehow like to see things in black and white. And you need good people on the board if you're going to make an issue of it. That's what happened there. But once they are civil servants and they're appointed to these boards by virtue of their office, Mr. Speaker, by virtue of...
Rumors of his demise was exaggerated.
I think that is out with the discussion that we're having.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to thank the members for their points and to say that this is bringing the liquor license board in line with the other boards we have in the department, namely the Trade and Business License Board and the Special Economic Zones Authority Board, which both have indemnities. Also to say that the negative publicity that came out of the actions of Mr. DaCosta that the Premier spoke about earlier made it next to impossible to find a chairman and a deputy chairman to serve on the board during that time. So we were very fortunate to get a very, very capable chairman and deputy chairman to serve, and they felt they would feel more comfortable with this indemnity. So I thank the members, as I had given them that promise that I would bring this to the House. Also, Mr. Chairman, this may help with some of the concerns about the civil servants and the board. If interpretations under 1.1, the interpretation for indemnified person means an indemnified person and that person's successors, heirs, executors, administrators, and personal representatives. So I think that's pretty broad in executors. Sorry, executors, you were doing so well, I had the word execution on my mind. So I think that's a pretty broad description of the indemnified person, and certainly clarifies that position for us. So not to drag it on any longer, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and thank you to the members for your support.
Question is, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly hereby authorizes the issuance to members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board for both the Sister Islands and Grand Cayman of deeds of indemnity guarding against the potential liability of members of the Board of Directors of the Liquor Licensing Board. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Government motion number 8 is duly passed.
Government motion number 9 of 2017-18, the immigration grant of right to be Caymanian order, number 4, 2017, to be moved by the Honourable Premier, Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move government motion number 9 of the 2017-2018 session of the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands, entitled the Immigration Grant of Right to be Caymanian Order number 4, 2017. Mr. Speaker, the motion provides, whereas Section 21E of the Immigration Law 2015 revision provides that the Cabinet, acting upon the recommendation of the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residency Board, may grant the right to be Caymanian in accordance with the section, and whereas the said Section 21E provides that such grant be ratified by the Legislative Assembly, and whereas the immigration grant of the right to be Caymanian Order number 4, 2017 was laid on the table of the Legislative Assembly this past Wednesday, be it therefore resolved that the immigration grant of the right to be Caymanian Order 2017 number 4 be affirmed by the Legislative Assembly pursuant to the provisions of Section 21E of the Immigration Law 2015 revision.
The question is, be it therefore resolved that the immigration grant of the right to be Caymanian, Order 2017 number 4, be affirmed by the Legislative Assembly pursuant to the provisions of Section 21E of the Immigration Law 2015 revision. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this motion relates to the grant by Cabinet of the right to be Caymanian on the 21st of November 2017 with respect to Mr. David Morit. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence. I thought I had my speaking notes here, but I don't seem to have them in the right place. What the hell did I do?
Man, it wouldn't know what that Benson was.
I don't think that's the case, though.
You want a break? We will take a brief suspension for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, and we'll be back here, 10 minutes.